It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
Stephen has a question. You know, Bo, you just mentioned buckets. You use this term. He said, can the guys talk a little bit more about the 3-bucket strategy? I've heard of it. He says he's even heard it is quote unquote mainly window dressing. Oh. He just wants a little bit more of an explanation.
So what's interesting is I can see some of the folks in our chat, some of the perennials in our chat that are here like every single time. And we happen to know someone personally, have an insight into their financial lives. I would love to hear them tell you if like the 3 buckets and the allocation of your assets, specifically later in life, is just window dressing. Because the guys I'm talking about, they will weigh in and tell you it is not just window dressing. But first, let me describe what the 3 buckets are and then why it matters. I'm gonna do this very, very quickly. We think that as you build towards financial independence, you ought to have 3 distinct tax buckets. You wanna have your tax-deferred bucket, that's like your 401ks and your IRAs. You want to have your tax-free bucket, those are your Roth assets and your HSA assets. And then you want to have your after-tax bucket. Those are the things that aren't tax incentivized necessarily, but they pay tax as you go through time, but you have access to them at any point in time. And so you have these 3 distinct buckets so that when you get to retirement, when you get to financial independence, no matter what the tax policy in play is, no matter what tax rates are, you can control your tax situation. It's not uncommon, Brian. We have a lot of clients who they might have 7-figure portfolios and they might be living off of 6-figure expense needs, but we're able to keep them in those lowest tax brackets because we'll max out a lower tax bracket from their IRAs and then we'll supplement that from their after-tax accounts, and you can pick and choose which accounts that you do. If all you do is you get to retirement and you have one single bucket and that bucket happens to be a pre-tax bucket, then every dollar that you pull out in retirement becomes fairly expensive because of having to pay ordinary income tax on that distribution.
I thought it was interesting. Industry-wide, there was actually a piece by a person who kind of talks about best practices for financial advisors. And they were making the argument that this is actually a place where most financial advisors are failing to add value to their clients. And it's a large material thing. Because I always say the 2 big things you need to pay attention to, fees you pay and the taxes you pay. And by the way, tax structure means a lot to you. And let me put this in context, because Bo has a great point. When you retire, it especially is very valuable. But even when you're on your wealth building journey, you get in a higher income situation and you start adding asset allocation. Because remember, when you're younger and building that foundation, I'm not against you just buying like an index target retirement fund because it's just you focus on one thing, really 2 things. How much can you save and when do you need the money? And it'll do the heavy lifting for you. But you will reach a critical mass where you're like, whoa, I'm in one of the higher tax brackets now. My asset classes mean a lot because the conservative stuff pays an ordinary income. You think about bonds, you think about your cash and other things, they pay as ordinary income payments. That interest is taxed at your highest marginal rate. Meanwhile, your index funds will pay out dividends, which we know they get the favorable 15% rate. Capital gains, as long as they're long-term, they pay out at a favorable rate. Plus you have all the cool planning structures with giving to charity, appreciated holdings. There's a lot that goes into it. I would be disgusted with already what I'm in that tippity top, 37% tax rate plus all the Medicare surcharges and everything else. If I was picking up all those additional fees when I can actually just through a good account structure, put those conservative assets over into those tax deferred retirement accounts. They do what they need to for my asset allocation, but I don't have the tax headwind that I have. You can say that that's window dressing, but that might be window dressing for somebody who's only got $50,000 in investments. But that's why we tell you, somebody who's at the beginning foundational stage, don't get busy doing nothing, focus on this stuff. Do the index target retirement funds or other things where you're focusing on how you get your income up, your expenses down, so your money can get to that critical mass. So that, yes, so you might be right. We might both be right that if you're in the beginning of your journey, this is window dressing for you because your assets haven't reached that critical mass. So focus on, like we share as part of the abundance cycle, go buy that index target retirement fund that is dirt cheap, that all you have to decide is how much can I save for the future? When do I need it? They do the rest of it. You don't even have to put another thought to it. But once you reach a critical mass point and we always talk about that. That's probably around $500,000 to $1 million. You are going to be like, yeah, this is starting to get to be a big tax impact. Think about Vanguard. We all know Vanguard is beloved for their low cost structure. But if you go back and look at the media reports in January or February of this year, there were so many people that were taking their big buses, running over Vanguard, throwing it in reverse, backing up over them, and then they, for good measuring, would put it back in drive, running back over Vanguard because they were so ticked off that Vanguard. Well, they were. Go look at the press coverage at the beginning of this year because Vanguard had a big distribution out of some of their funds, and people were like, "No, Vanguard doesn't do this. They're supposed to have this patented way that you don't pay income taxes." And a lot of people were even calling for the government to step in and do better on protecting investors from these huge distributions, because we even have to do planning on that. Because think about when your mutual funds or you're in some of these funds out there give a distribution that's 35 to 40%.
It's big.
You have $100,000 or $200,000 in this one fund. You're like,
it's a big taxable event.
Pay attention to taxes. Fees and taxes are very important to your long-term success.